We are live. Hi, Akil.
How you doing?
I'm great. It's great to see you.
Good to see you.
And welcome, friends, joining us. We've got a poll. Some of y'all are clicking on it, which is cool. It's fun to watch that we're mostly talking to parents. We got more counselors and teachers coming in. It's fun to watch the meters go. If anybody's like, what are they talking about on the right side of the screen, there should be a thing you can click on that says poll, and you can check that out. And well, what we're finding is that apparently the parents were early and the counselors and teachers and students are coming in a little bit a minute after time. So hi and welcome, friends. Welcome to the session. We've been talking for the last couple weeks about bringing more ease, joy, and purpose to your college admission process. And my guest today is Akil Boa. Akil, welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to talk about testing, which I think Akil will tell you he's been talking about for a while. I'll have you share your bio in just a minute and your background. So just before we got on, I was like, maybe this is one of the last times we'll be talking about this because Akil's knowledge runs wide and deep, especially when it comes to college admissions, but on a lot of other topics as well. Before we dive in, I want to just, as folks get settled in, I want to ask some kind of check-in question because I'm curious to hear kind of like taking the temperature of where folks are at today. So even though it's kind of odd to do this, with hundreds of folks at a time, I'm curious to know, and I'm going to put this in the chat box, is what's present? This is a general question for everybody. Check-in question is what's present for you today? And I want to use this as a check-in question for us, Akil. What's present for you today as we get started on this webinar?
That's a good question. I don't know. Work and family, mostly family. I actually played basketball today. Oh, it was 66 degrees in New York, and on the way home, I stopped in the park and I played basketball.
Yes,
that's the win.
Where did you play, by the way?
Just the park near my house on the corner.
Okay.
Yep. I used to played 4-on-4, and I won. Although I shot terribly because my knees are 50-year-old knees and don't do what they're supposed to.
I played basketball on Sunday for the first time in I want to say 5 years or more, and I overheard by me on the court was feeling a little 40 right now. So I feel you. Yeah. What's present for me today is I'm actually still, it's a couple days later and I'm still feeling like the aches of that. So I feel you on that. So anyway, y'all feel free to check in. We'd love to hear from you. What's up for you all today? What's present for you? A couple quick announcements before we get into the content. First of all, happy Black History Month. I found a quote by Colin Powell that I really liked. It's a really simple quote, but it feels like one of those that I like simple quotes because I can remember them. And this one in particular, I liked. Colin Powell said, have a vision and be demanding. And if you hate the check-in question that I gave already, you can answer for us, what is your vision for this year? And that could be either personal or in your work. I'm curious to know. If you're an educator or even a parent who's interested in issues in learning more about Black History Month, I'm going to share in the chat and we'll follow up with this as well, a guide for educators and families with a ton of resources. I wanted to actually share my screen real quick, if I may. A ton of resources ranging from, I'll take a quick look here. Let me expand my screen. From resources for if you're a teacher or a counselor, as I know some of y'all are. Here are 50 resources for Black History Month. Do we need Black History Month? The underrepresentation and miseducation of Black stories, experience, and histories in schools. Just a ton of great articles and pieces. If you scroll down, you'll see how do we center Black women and Black girls in our schools? How do we center the Black LGBTQ experience? As a parent, what are some ways that I can engage my family in Black History Month? So some more resources and articles. Pretty much just a ton of content. So I invite y'all to check those out. We've also got, we'll share this link as well. We've got, for those of you who are counselors who are interested in issues of equity and access, we've got a resource called 40 Plus Ways that counselors can help bring more equity and access to the college admission process. And it's a webinar, there's a webinar attached to it that we gave last year that just offer a ton of ideas. And if you're interested in that, we'll again follow up with links on it. If you're ever wondering what's happening at College Essay Guy, we've got a new events page, it will have this webinar once we finish recording it, and it'll have basically everything else. If you didn't make it for the other parts of the series, which were on, there was a short one on financial aid and one just on general counseling. What should you be thinking about this time of year? You can check them out on that page. And then coming up this weekend, we've got a mini course. We've been doing these mini courses. This one's on financial aid, on how do you understand affordability, where to apply, or what schools, can be made affordable, and like how do you even talk scholarships. We're going to walk through there's a new, slightly updated free application for federal student aid. So Amanda Miller, who's the expert on this, is going to be co-leading the course. Well, she's actually leading the course. I'm kind of playing MC. She's going to talk about the new FAFSA that's coming out and the changes. There's also she's going to go over a step-by-step guide to building your college list that takes into account, finances. How do you find scholarships? What do you do when the amount you've been offered by a college isn't quite enough? This is a pay what you can mini course, as all of our courses are. And Ashley, who's standing by, who's our moderator here in the background, is going to be sharing links on that. So you can, if you've got questions, you can just be like, hey, Ashley, here's a question about this, and she'll answer that. But what we're doing today is we're talking testing. We're going to talk today about some of the main questions, like should you prep for the test? Should you even take it with all the test optional stuff that's going on? And then once you have your scores, how do you know when to submit, if you should submit? Really, the if question is one that students get tripped up on. A question that students sometimes ask is, does this test optional thing really actually mean test optional? So we'll get into that. And then there's a new digital SAT. Does that impact you or does it not? Who does it impact? What does it look like? Akil's been doing some thinking about it and some writing about it. We'll probably share a link to I'm sure you've written a few pieces on this. The one I read was, I think, in Forums on this. But yeah, we'll get into that as well. But before all that, Akil, will you just give us will you just introduce yourself a little bit and say who you are, what you're about, how long you've been thinking about this, those kind of things?
Sure. I began my career in test prep in 1990 at Princeton Review. I've taught basically every admissions test you've ever heard of, and probably some you haven't. I actually ran my own company for 11 years. So I started at Princeton Review, then I started my own company, did that for 11 years, got sick about that, went back to Princeton Review, did that for another 4 years, helped friends launch their test prep companies, done basically everything you could possibly imagine, from teaching students and teachers, taking the test, training people how to teach the test, starting companies around the test. And then these days I am working as the senior director at Fair Test, arguing against the horrible use to which the tests are currently put, and trying to bring some sanity back to the world of admissions testing, which has jumped the shark, as they say. So that's the short story.
Thank you. And I want to get into some of that. Like, let's sort of deliver the goods, but I would like to get a little meta and talk about some of these shifts that are happening. And as ever, y'all with questions, just throw them into the chat box. Ashley is going to be grabbing questions and putting them onto a Google Doc for Akil and me, and I'll be picking some of those in a few minutes when we get into the Q&A section. So in this, current pandemic / post-pandemic world, how do students decide whether or not they should even take standardized tests?
Okay, so that's a good question. I think the question should be sorted first by graduating class. International students in the graduating class of 2023. Hopefully there are none in the graduating class of 2022 still left in this conversation. But first, the digital SAT is going to be rolled out for the graduating class of 2023 internationally, or in 2023 internationally, and in 2024 domestically. So part of this whole messy conversation is, which test will you actually be taking, right? So that's part of the trouble. I'm gonna take that off the table for a minute and just talk about what grade you're in and ignore the digital mess that creates. I think the first question is, as long as the student has enough time, your first question is to just do some basic prep and see if the test will help you, right? To do some basic, if you can take the PSAT as a 10th grader, fine, you take it. You don't have to invest anything in it. It's a practice test. You can even just download a free practice test online and take it and see where you are. If you are a testing savant and you kill the test, then yeah, take the test. If you absolutely hate everything about the test, then you have to consider whether there's value to testing for you. One of the things that have changed in this environment is it's now actually, I look at testing the same way as I look at APs. Should you take APs? If they're helpful,
Mhm.
Do you have to take APs? No. Nobody has to take APs. You can get into college without taking APs. So now testing has gone from absolutely required at the vast majority of schools to not required at the vast majority of schools. So what has happened is colleges have pushed the decisions off onto students to say, you need to determine whether you think this is a skill you have. And if it is a skill you have, are you going to submit it to us? So it feels a little bit less certain for students because they aren't told an absolute. But I think if you look at it in the same way as you look at extracurricular activities and what classes you take in school and whether you take APs or not, you look at it in the same way. If this is something I can do that will help me, then yeah, sure, I'll send it. If it's something that will not help me, then I'm not going to send it.
Mhm.
Or you can also look at it regionally. If I'm in California or applying to California public schools, they're not looking at it at all. The UCs and the Cal State system have said, we're not looking at test scores at all for at least the next 5 years. So if you're in California planning on going to a California public, I wouldn't even bother looking at the test at all.
Mhm.
If I'm in Florida or Georgia, where the public institutions require the test, then I have to do it. So that changes my decision entirely. Where am I based right now? Right? Where do I plan to go to college?
Mhm.
So I think for most people, there's two questions that sort of start the conversation. Is it required in the colleges I want to go to? Right? Or is it optional? Right? Is it a skill I have? Or is it something that's really painful?
Yeah.
Right? And those decisions can also be delayed. That's why I have a blog on my website where I frame it as 3 questions. Should you prep? Because you can prep and choose not to take the test, right? Should I test? You can prep and decide not to take it, right? So you can prep and decide not to take it. You can test and decide not to submit your scores, right? So you really have 3 tiered decisions that you make as you get closer to sending out your applications. Should you prep? Should you test? And should you submit? You don't have to make all those decisions today. You make the decisions that are required to be made today and wait and see what happens. Maybe you have, $5,000 to burn on test prep and you want to spend $5,000, $10,000, $50,000, whatever you have to spend on test prep, you spend it on test prep. You want to spend 0 on test prep? Fine, spend 0 on test prep. Prep, see if you get a score that you think is worth submitting, and then you make that decision after you have your score. Right?
Yeah.
That's one way to go about it. If you are a person who hates testing, then you can opt out right now, which I think is a great option to have.
You mean there are other things that students could do with their lives other than
what? Other than, yes, spend every Saturday forever taking a practice test just for a one-time test that maybe be useful in college admissions? Yeah, I'd rather students do something more like that.
Let's get real practical for just a second, because there are going to be those students who are like, well, yes, I think I'm going to crush this. And they're maybe super competitive and they're like, I want to just see if I can crush this. And then there are the students who are like, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to take it. For those students in the middle, is there like a practical suggestion that you would be like, all right, here's a way to find out if you're not sure? Where would you send them to like find out to do, for example, those practice tests and a little bit of that prep?
So in terms of like a practice test, you can do official ones, which are a little bit better, meaning like PSAT in school or pre-ACT in school. Those scores take a longer time to come back, so they're not as great for getting kind of immediate responses. You can go to College Board and download 8 practice SATs for free.
Right.
You can go to ACT and download 1 for free. You can go to a bookstore and buy their official guidebooks. So there are definitely practice tests available. And there are 2 blogs that I think will probably end up in the chat that I wrote that have links to practice tests for both. Great. And you can just download a PDF at home and score it at home, time it as well as you can, and then look and see where your score falls, right? Most colleges, every college, still publishes the average score of their admitted classes. And if you look at that range, if the school has a range from 1,200 to 1,300, right, and you've got a 1,350, your score is going to look good at that place, right? If you have a 900, then it's going to take you a ton of work to get to a place where the score starts to distinguish you. And you have to answer the question of, is it worth it to you? Right? If I have to work to get 300 points improvement, I don't know if that's worth it to me. Right? And now I have the option to opt out of that sort of sort of pointless effort, or I don't know if I'd say it's pointless effort. To me, this test scores are just temporary information, right? Like, you learn all of these temporary skills to get really good at the SAT, and then when it's done, nobody cares. You're either in or you're not, and you move on with your life. I don't know if I want to spend 50 hours getting an SAT score better for no real meaning in my life.
Right. There's also there's that what I hear you speaking to is that all or nothing approach. Like that the students are either going to do it and full on. But what I hear you saying is like, do a little bit of it, see how you like it, see if you feel like it's worthwhile, and then you can opt out.
I mean, you can opt out at so many different points in this process,
right?
Which is the nice thing. I think that the biggest problem in all of this is hyper focus on individual things, on narrow things, hyper focus on one college, hyper focus on one particular number on a test, hyper focus on the SAT instead of the ACT, right? All of those things limit your options and make this process more stressful than it needs to be.
Yes. I mean, I was going to say amen. I don't know, but yes, it's like, and you know what I'm hearing too is it's reminding me of the when my wife and I were thinking about buying a house, and we sat down with a real estate person, and they said, well, you're not buying a house today. You're like, the question is like, do you want to start looking for a house? And we're like, yeah, we're thinking that would be cool. And then they're like, and then we're going to go look at some houses. And then you decide, do you want to like put an offer in on a house? And then you can opt out there. And then once the offer is accepted, do you want to, go into escrow and all these things? So there are all these moments that's going to resonate with like 0 students, but maybe parents can, relate and hear that and go, okay, yeah. So there are all these moments that are time bound that actually limit. What I hear you saying too is like the sort of stress that comes from the uncertainty of not knowing X, Y, Z, and Q. Like I hear you saying focus on what you can control, which is these micro decisions.
That's the problem with college admissions these days. Is there's so many people there's so many families who are looking for guarantees. And there are so many business people who are trying to sell you a guarantee. I'm going to upsell you to, I guarantee you a 1,500 on your SAT, and that will guarantee you admission and none of that is true. This is a process which is full of ambiguity and uncertainty until it happens. Every year, students are surprised by where they've gotten in and where they haven't. If you can remove some of the stress of feeling the need to know all the things before you apply and feeling the need for certainty in the process and just enter it with accepting that there's going to be some level of uncertainty, it gets easier. I'm going to apply to 10 schools. I'm going to get into one of them. Life will go on. Ideally, I'll get into 2, 3, or 4 of them and have some choices around how much I pay. That would be the perfect world. But I'm going to make sure that I can apply to enough schools so that I get into one of them and at least have one option for college. Yeah. And you know what? Even if it doesn't work out this year, I get no options. Guess what? I can apply again next year. Life doesn't end at 12th grade. So I think part of this is just relieving all of that hyper focus on this one moment in time.
Yeah. Yeah. The question that's popping up for me is that I'm imagining some students have is, okay, well then, how much do scores matter? And I'm actually interested in like what is your sense of how much scores matter now? Like has that shifted?
So I think that the perception of how much scores matter has shifted. They definitely matter less than they used to. Prior to, in 2019, the NACAC survey, I believe, had test scores somewhere down at like 75%. Like 75% of colleges said it carries some measure of importance, right? Behind grades in college level classes, behind some other stuff, right? So it wasn't the most important thing at almost any place, but they said it had some, I think the phrase was actually important or very important, something like that. It wasn't kind of like it's everything. But people tend to perceive college admissions as GPA and test score. Mm-hmm. Right? But that's not really what it is. It's more than that, especially depending on the institution you're applying to. So I think what we have to recognize is the weight put on a test score at an individual school is almost impossible to know. It's almost impossible to know what individual reader is going to look at a score and recommend you for admissions or not, right? The best you can do is say, I want to submit the best package that I can. And if testing allows me to submit a good number, then I'll do that. If it doesn't, now I have the option to withhold that. Right? If it's not something I'm willing to do, it doesn't even have to be a bad score. Like I was talking to a student today who likely is looking at getting into 1500, but just doesn't want to do it. So like, just don't do it. Like unless you're applying to a Florida school or Georgetown, which is historically known for loving tests in a very bizarre way, right? Like if I'm applying to Georgetown, I don't care if they say they're test optional. I'm definitely going to send scores because Georgetown is they've got a reputation. They love scores in a very weird way.
I'm aware of that same perception and that. So then let me click on that a second. So how are students going to know if test optional really means test optional? Like for which schools does it actually mean test optional?
Almost all of them. Colleges aren't in the business generally of lying to you. You may not understand their decision-making process, but colleges aren't sitting here going, how can I trick students into sending applications that I'll reject? Like, that's not really what they're trying to do, right? So you have to take them at face value. I also ask, if they're going to lie to me in the admissions process, why would I ever want to go there? Like, please reject me before you lie to me about my dorm room too. And I can't, I show up and I don't have a place to live. So I'm good with you rejecting me. You generally don't know the internal workings of a school, right? You do know, you can find out a little bit of the rumor mill. You can find out some of the known, the information in the ether. You can do some digging around and try to read into statements. I feel like Yale just released a statement, but the link of the URL is like the COVID testing policy, which is very different than another place that says our test optional policy, right? Because they're still connecting that to COVID and cancellations and things like that, right? I don't know if I'm making that too deep. Maybe it just happened to be the page they put it on, right? So like you could spend forever, right? Like trying to wrap your head around and get into the minds of these people, or you could just say, I'm going to do the best I can and either choose to send a score or not. That's the part that you can control. So I would highly recommend that you get out of the gamesmanship of trying to predict what colleges are going to do, and you just focus on the things you can control, right? If a school say they're test optional, they will absolutely review an application without a test score. That's what you know, right? Schools also say that APs aren't required. Schools also say calculus isn't required. Like, how much of your time are you going to spend trying to determine what required actually means, right? The optional essay is not required. So you have to make some decisions. Is this something that I know is optional, but I want to do all the optional things because I think it will help me? Or is it something that you're just going to say, you know what, that's a bridge too far. I've done the AP class. I've done the optional essay. I've done the optional campus visit. I draw the line at the optional test. You just have to make a decision at some point of which optional things are you willing to do and which ones you're not.
So this is a quick shift, but I'm curious about, and I know you've written on this a little bit, but will you tell us, for folks who don't know that there is this digital SAT coming, just give us sort of like the headline of what it is, maybe a little bit on why you think it is, because I'm curious to click on that. And then specifically for students, like, whom does it impact?
So domestically, the digital SAT will be the only SAT available come spring of 2024. So it impacts juniors. So class of 2025 and beyond is really who it impacts. Internationally, the SAT goes entirely digital in spring of 2023. So it impacts the class of 2024 and beyond internationally. For those, I don't want to be the guinea pig. I'm looking at ACT. Right. I think they're going to put out some information, but I think that largely what you'll see is the same thing that happened, when the SAT went this current version 5 years ago or whatever it was. Seems like yesterday to me, whatever it was, 2016 or something like that. Right. Everybody ran into the ACT because there's 10 years of data to show you what the test looks like. The digital SAT, they'll probably release 3 or 4 practice tests before the test, and that's all you have to go by. And we won't know how accurate it is until we've seen the test in action a few times. So, if you are class of 2025 domestically and beyond, then I would be looking at the ACT rather than the SAT, just because the less doubt I can have in this process, the easier it will be. Right. So why do I think they did a digital test? One, it's long overdue. A digital test made sense. Two, the debacle of AP last year and what happened with COVID, they had to come up with a digital solution. There have been other admissions tests that have been digital for a decade, if not more. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of passed to ACT had a digital ACT internationally for the past 2 or 3 years. So it was just time for them to do it. One, it was time. Two, it was the right environment because they were forced to cancel so many tests. Their bottom line was hit. So, of course, they had to come up with a solution. I, in theory, might like the digital test better because it's a third shorter, but I won't know that for several years. So it would be a hard test to recommend.
Let's do some friendly forecasting. Where is this, test optional movement headed? What's your sense?
So before the pandemic, 2019, about 1,050, maybe 1,080 colleges were test optional. And I'm saying colleges using the universe of colleges, which is about 2,300 institutions in the United States that give 4-year degrees. So just about like getting towards half of them, right? Right now it's at about 1,800. So it's huge, right? There's been it's almost doubled the number of colleges that are test optional. Yeah. I don't see that going back to 2019 levels. I see that a lot of schools will just stay test optional for the foreseeable future. California drives a lot of behavior, and they're test free for the next 5 years at least.
And what's giving you that sense?
Because at almost no school have they looked up and said, oh my God, this is terrible. Historically, almost no school that goes test optional goes back. I think the only one might have been Sarah Lawrence. I think they went test free though, and then became optional. Right. And a lot of that has to do with some other internal things that they were dealing with. So I think that largely what you'll see is people staying pat. Mm-hmm. I don't think that number will ever get back below, let's say, 1,600.
A question comes in from Mike here asking, let me read it exactly as written. Are there any acceptance rate stats from the last couple of years of students who chose test optional versus those who took the test? Have you seen any data on that?
They are, but it's all bad. So What I mean by that is what you get is usually test prep companies and tutors, of whom I am still an SAT tutor. So every time I beat up SAT prep people and SAT tutors, I'm talking about myself. So usually you get these test prep companies and tutors that say, here's the stat for the people with scores and their admissions rate. Here's the admissions rate for people without scores. But that number is meaningless unless you include GPA and extracurriculars and did they apply early or not. So you do get some information. And there are some places, I think I've seen a chart of maybe 20 odd schools where there's a huge range of, some of them are 50-50. The admission rate is almost exactly the same with scores and without. And some of them, there's a huge discrepancy. But often when you dig into the schools, it's schools like people, I think I saw one newspaper article that quoted Georgetown. It was like, at Georgetown, 68% of the admitted class said test scores. Everybody knows Georgetown loves scores. So of course, Georgetown's population is largely going to send test scores.
Right. Yeah. They didn't, what about the equal report from UCLA?
Right. Yeah. So that's the tough part, right? Like exactly. Or you get the report from UCLA, nobody sent scores because they said they weren't reading them.
0% of students submitted this year.
Exactly. And they were all admitted.
I imagine that there were a bunch of students who still, they're like, we're test blind, and they're like, I'm still putting this in my additional info section because I want them to know.
So I think that any data on admitted rates that is looking solely at test scores versus no test score is flawed at best. It might make you feel more comfortable, and if it makes you feel more comfortable, look at it. But, I just don't know how to create meaning out of those numbers.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question. I'm not sure if it's trolling or not, but someone's asking, how can universities select students without standardized testing? And that's the whole question. There might be more to that question, but how do then people differentiate among students? I know this is like an underhanded pitch for you, but
I mean, to me, it's like asking, how do I pick my basketball team without doing a free throw contest? It's one small element of the process. If we took that away, I'd be just fine. I'm still going to pick LeBron over Shaq because I like LeBron's game better. Right? I feel like he's a better all-around player. But actually, if I already have 4 of my 5 starters picked and I need a big man, then I'm going to pick Shaq, not LeBron. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things that people overlook is there's GPA, there's extracurriculars, there's strength of curriculum, there's school, there's all of these other things that colleges have. Like the UCs are a great example, right? Because they actually have a metric that they announce. They have 14 different data points they look at. So if I take away one, you think they suddenly can't make good decisions? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They're essentially probably making the same decisions or slightly shifted decisions if you only take away one data point.
Yeah. For those who are curious, for those who are curious about that, if you Google 13 points of comprehensive review, you'll probably actually see something that we wrote, that college essay guy wrote. But there's a whole, and they're really explicit about exactly what they're looking for in those 13 points of comprehensive review. And just side note, the personal insight questions that they require students to write correspond directly to those 13 points of comprehensive review. So they're asking, in some cases, especially in the UCs, they're asking for like specific information from students.
Also keep in mind that like the UCs are not every state system. The UCs are a very unique state system. There's a high level of demand. California has a huge population. They have a great college system, a great public college system. So the UCs are going to be very different than, say, SUNY in New York, right? Mm-hmm. And so you have to, you can, I think that you look at college admissions in one of two ways. Either you pick the colleges that you want to go to for the educational experience, and then you just do the best you can to submit your best profile as a student, and you let the chips fall the way they may. Or you spend a whole lot of time trying to do game theory and figure out where you can get in and where you can't. And it just seems like a waste of time to me to spend time playing game theory.
Mm-hmm. So let's say a student has decided they do want to do some kind of prep. Where do you recommend they go to like think about prepping for the tests?
Oh, that's hard. I think you have to consider time, budget, and resources. There's, if you started kind of at the most expensive level of prep, then you're looking for a tutor. Right? A one-on-one personalized tutor, which can run you anywhere from $50 an hour to $700 an hour, right? If you then are looking for, let's say, the next level down, then that's probably courses, right? And if I'm going to do a course, I don't know how to recommend a course in random places that I've never heard of. I don't know what to say in Bangladesh, right? So all I can really say is if you stay with a big known name, it gives you a level of consistency of product. It's like going to McDonald's. I don't think it's the best, but at least I know what I'm getting. So I think that like me not being able to make any other recommendation than like, find a company, then you go with a big name because at least they have some history of doing this work, because test prep is unregulated. Any random schmo can hang up a sign and said, I'm an SAT expert, and you don't know that to be true. So you have to do a fair level of due diligence. If you're looking for free resources, then you're ending up at things like Khan Academy. There's nothing great for ACT. ACT used to have some free resources. They have a few resources that you can get access to if you have already signed up for the test with a fee waiver. So it requires a lot of planning in advance to make that happen. But Khan Academy has an SAT prep section. Obviously, other free things would be like random YouTube stuff. But again, it's kind of hit or miss because anybody can post something on YouTube, make a flashy video, and make it seem like they know what they're talking about and be dead wrong. And I've seen a lot of that. So it's tough to recommend blindly resources for people without knowing something. I will say one thing. Jen the Tutor on Twitter, her pinned tweet is like a 60 tweet thread on books that she's reviewed. I would use that as a starting point. And if you're on Twitter, I don't mind answering questions about specific stuff. I'll take a look at it. Maybe one day I'll actually put together an actual list, but it changes too much for me to consistently maintain a list of good free resources. The best I can come up with right now is Khan for the SAT.
Great.
Yeah.
So this is kind of coming back to something that this question that was just asked, but I noticed there was another question that came in even before this session. In the absence of testing, are colleges using weighted grading systems? Are advances and difficult courses weighted for more in the GPA? Larger question is like, what are schools doing to tell the difference between how can the school tell what a 4.0 means at school A versus a 4.0 at school B?
So again, this is one of those questions that like you're ending up in a lot of weird game theory, because the way colleges evaluate curriculum and transcripts are very different depending on the college. University of Missouri used to have a grid on their website that said GPA plus test score is admitted. Like they just had straight up, here's your GPA row, here's your test score row, find where you meet and we'll tell you if you're admitted or not. That was like, and so they weren't even looking at what your classes were. It was straight up GPA and straight up test score, right? Now I'm sure they've tweaked that a little bit since they're test optional. It might just be entirely GPA now, right? So again, this is the question of certainty that people are looking for that I just don't think you want to. I think that if you get out of your mind of like being able to know if I'm going to get admitted before I submit an application, that you'll feel a lot better. Just accept the uncertainty that's going to come with the process. Mm-hmm. Yes, colleges generally look at the strength of your curriculum. Yes, they generally look at the strength of your curriculum in context of your school and comparable schools. So what does that mean? I don't really know, because that's a different process at every place, right? They want to know, I think it would also vary depending on what major you're applying to, right? If you're applying for STEM, yeah, they probably want, if you're applying for engineering, they probably want to see that you took calculus. If you're not applying for engineering, let's say you're applying to MIT for poetry, I would imagine they're smart enough to go, we don't need to find calculus on his transcript, right? So a lot of the sort of broad generalizations that people want to make about college admissions fall apart when you start talking about individual circumstance, right? Because what do you want to major in? What are the colleges you're applying to? What are the institutional priorities at that university, right? So I think the simplest answer to all of this is take the most rigorous curriculum you can take and still achieve a level of grades that say he learned and excelled at this place. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? That's kind of, and I know it's not a good, like solid answer. That's probably the best answer you can get.
I mean, take the hardest courses you can do well in, right?
Right.
Does it matter when students test if they do decide to test? And no. If you could, like, what's sort of like not ideal timeline, but what's a good timeline for students to consider?
The normal testing timeline is first test in the spring of the junior year, and then second test in the summer or fall of the senior year. Usually 2 tests of the same variety, so either 2 SATs or 2 ACTs. I don't love having students take both tests. Ideally, what you'll do is prior to prep, you decide which test, you take a practice of both and choose which one you're best at. Then you go all in on preparing for that one, and that's the one you submit. Right. So ideally we'll narrow it down to 1 test and just deal with that. But usually the schedule is spring of the junior year and then fall of the senior year, or fall or summer of the senior year. There's summer tests for both of them. There's like a first weekend in September ACT or last weekend in August SAT. And I love those tests because it's while the students are largely still out of school. And so you can prep when you're out of school, take the test when you're out of school, and go into your senior year with your testing all done, which is kind of the perfect scenario.
I remember, I don't even know if you know this, but I taught test prep for a few years and wrote curriculum and the like. And I remember students trying to figuring out what time of year would be, they should take it, right? Because one theory went, well, this is when people will have done the prep. And so the scores are going to be higher. And so if I take it then I'm going to be like relatively lower. Is there any merit to any of that?
Nope. All of that game theory all of that stuff about when to take the test, which is the best. None of that has ever been true. The people who write this test run statistical analysis on everything. And they make sure, to the extent that they can control it, that they've controlled for all the things that, that kids do. So they're not going to, put the hard test in December. That's not how it works, right? They make sure that they're smarter than that. And the minute it hits the internet, like, let's even pretend that it got past the people at College Board and ACT, that that people have found out that the December test is the hardest. They have people on Reddit. They have people whose job is to monitor Reddit. And as soon as it goes, December SAT is the easiest, right? Somebody's told the bosses and they change it up. So it'll never survive more than 5 minutes after it hits the internet or hits the rumor mill, because they also have people in test prep companies who are calling them and saying, hey, I heard this. And they're just going to make sure that it doesn't remain true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You answered this already, but as soon as you answered the question, there were 2 or 3 people live in the chat that asked specifically to answer this question. And so I want to be really explicit with folks. And the question is basically a version of what's a good score? How do I know whether or not to submit? And I want to share my screen for a second, because I want to basically do the thing that you just told students to do. But if let's say you are wanting to apply to Northwestern, you can literally Google average test scores for Northwestern, and you'll see something like this pop up. So the average in math, 765, reading and writing, 730. So what I heard you say, Nikhil, is if your scores are above that, then that's going to look good. If it's below that, then that's going to look bad.
And actually, let me put a pin in this one and say, no, don't use Prep Scholar.
Oh, that's Prep Scholar. My bad.
That's Prep Scholar. If you look at the link on the bottom. Now, here's the things that are bad about this, right? They're showing an average and the 25th percentile. But what colleges release are the 25th and 75th percentile. So I'm not sure why they decided to drop the 75th percentile from their chart. What I would actually use is, these days I tend to be looking at the CDS of every school. Big Future used to be good.
Tell people what that is.
It's not good anymore.
Common
data set.
Yep.
So if you do common data set of a school, it's actually kind of cool. Now this is a little bit nerdy and in the weeds, but let's just click on the 2021 there for Northwestern.
Yep. Thank you.
And what we want is, let's scroll down a little bit, the PDF. Yeah,
I think it's C8 is the section.
Yeah, exactly. C9. It's actually C9.
Is it C9? C8 is demonstrated interest. So here, watch. I'm just going to do a quick search, C9, and here's the freshman profile. There we go.
So if we blow that up a little bit, so here's what we're seeing here. The percentage submitting SATs or ACTs, we can see the SAT composite. So you have the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile for the 2021 year, right? So basically 25% of the people who were enrolled, because that's what this is. This isn't actually applied. This is enrolled. So these numbers are a little skewed, right? Because I don't know the difference between the application pool and the accepted pool and the enrolled pool, right? They're different pools, right? But let's just take this one because that's what we have. So of those who enrolled in Northwestern, 25% had less than a 1430. I'll say, so you can get a 1400 and have a decent shot at getting admitted. What I actually like to do is scroll down further to the second chart there. Yeah, look at that score range. They actually break down the percentages of how many people. Okay, so a 500, any kind of 500 in math, you have a 2% chance. That's not really true because we don't know GPA, athletes, all of those other sort of, I don't know who that 2% is, right? But 2% of the enrolled students had a 500 to 599 in reading and basically 2% in math. That's good to know.
Yeah. Which
basically says to me, above a 600, they admit you. Right? They admit far more in the 7s than in the 6s. But that tells me, okay, fine, at Northwestern, if I want to get in, if I want to have a good shot, I need above 600, especially in math. In math, I probably need above 7.
Right.
Cool. That's good to know.
Great. That's hopefully for those of you counselors watching, that's the most practical thing that we'll do. But that's literally how you know it. And you can just do that for the schools that you're applying to. So if you're trying to figure out what's a good score, ask yourself for which school, right? Go look in the common data set. There's also, because we're here, this is not a session on demonstrated interest. We'll do that some other time. But if you're interested in finding out what else does this school find important, like what do they consider, you can scroll up here to section C7, and you'll see that here's what's very important to Northwestern: how hard your classes are, your class rank, your GPA. They consider standardized test scores, right? So it's considered, but it's not important. It's not very important. It's considered. Essays and recommendation letters are considered important. Interviews considered, again, not important, not very important. I know this because every year I would interview students and they wouldn't get in. I was like, I'm giving these kids great recommendation letters. What's going on? Nobody was, I don't know. Anyway, and then some other things that they consider down here: work experience, level of applicant's interest. If you're hearing me talking about demonstrated interest and you're like, what is that? If you wouldn't mind, Ashley, would you just throw our link to our demonstrated interest guide? I don't want to freak people out, but for some schools, they care if you care about. Anyway, you can learn more about that.
Tell me you love me. They want you to tell them you love them, so that they know if you love them, you'll come and give them your $300,000 or whatever it is.
Exactly.
I think what's interesting here to me is think about the perception and the conversation we're having around test scores and where it falls on this chart. It's below 5 other things, right? It's below essay. It's below recommendations. It's below interview and extracurriculars. And talent and abilities and personal qualities, whatever that means, right? That's fascinating. Now, I also understand that it's one of the things that feels most controllable in the last hurrah, right? Mm-hmm. So I think people do tend to focus on it, but perhaps we're giving it outsized weight. And that considered is probably true going back multiple years, even before they were test optional. So I think that there's a perception of the weight testing carries that probably isn't true.
Are there any acceptance? Oh, sorry, I answered that one. These are. Thank you. Ashley's bolding all the questions. Usually we bold the ones we're going to answer. She's bolding the ones we've already answered, which is great. I'm pausing for a second to see. And by the way, y'all, we're welcoming your questions. Feel free to throw them
in. There's this one question about accommodations for students with learning differences.
Please do it.
The only thing I'll say about that is you have to apply direct to each different testing agencies. So essentially the responsibility is on the student/family to apply for accommodations, to submit medical paperwork and testing and all of that. And then the testing agency decides whether or not they're going to give it to you and what they're going to give it to you. There's no correlation to testing accommodations in school. Let me say that better. There's a loose correlation to if you get accommodations in school, whether you'll get accommodations from these private companies, essentially. So what you need to do is start applying for accommodations early. Give yourself far longer than the 6 to 8 weeks they recommend, and make sure you get it out the way as soon as you can so you can find out whether you're going to be accepted or denied and what you'll get if they accept the request for accommodations.
Mm-hmm. Here's one from Sophia. To what extent do schools take into consideration incomes, backgrounds when judging the test scores of students? So that a 1200 by, for example, a minority student means one thing and it might mean something different. How does that, what would you have to say about that?
I would say that schools are not so much judging the test scores as they're judging. I think they're looking at a lot of different things when they're considering admissions, right? So if you have a 1200 out of a school that your score is the highest the school have ever seen, right? Then the college will likely understand that whatever resources existed in the school to prepare people for the test, you've excelled far beyond that, right? So I think it has less to do with, and I guess that's in all contexts, right? Race, income, high school level, whatever it is, country of origin, right? China has a fairly high level average SAT score, right? So if you have a 1200 coming out of China, that's probably not that doesn't distinguish you because that's probably below the average score of China. So, but if you're coming out of a high school where the average score, where that school is known to the college and the average score is 1000 and you have a 1200, that matters. So part of the answer here is yes. Do they understand scores in context? Yes, absolutely. What context they look at, I don't know for sure. It would depend on the institution. I would think that a 1200 out of China that's applying to a school that has no Chinese applicants will be very different from a 1200 out of China that's applying to a school that gets 30% of the applications from China. So a lot of it will depend on what the institution is, what the admissions offices, practices are, how they consider the various factors. A school that only draws from Pennsylvania, right, gets their first applicant from China, they may not care about your scores at all. They're like, hey, we get to put China in our brochure. We got students from 14 countries now. Woohoo! We don't care what your scores are, right? So those things may carry more weight, more so than the raw score in and of itself. But do they? So the short answer to your question is, do they look at scores in question? Yes. How much weight does it carry? What does it make up for? I don't know. And that will vary across different schools.
Yeah. By the way, is there a school in the U.S. that you can think of that gets 30% of its applicants from China, or was that a made up hypothetical school?
It's a not quite made up. I believe it's the percentage at Pratt Institute out of Korea. I want to, maybe it's international at Pratt Institute, which is my alma mater. So that's sort of why I was thinking about it.
I want to zoom back and talk a little bit about admissions at large. What are some of the things that you feel like students, and you've already mentioned a couple, but what are some other things that you feel like students get wrong about this process?
Ooh, what do students get wrong? Hyper focus on one place. That's the biggest thing that I'm like, and worries about no's. And then social media. I think those things are all wrong. I hate the celebration videos. Because they're fake. They're just like Instagram. Like, everybody only posts the pretty moments. The celebration video of the one school you got into, ignored the 7 you didn't. Right. So like I just don't think that, I think that there's far too much of that. Hyper focus on one place, right? Like, that like my life is set on Duke or I'll die. Right? Like that. I don't understand that. And I think that that's not particularly good. Because you can be because one is academically qualified and eligible and whatever other words you want to use that say, can you do the work at the school? And admitted aren't the same thing, right? Duke might need more students from Vermont one year, because if they don't admit 5 from Vermont, they won't be able to put in their brochures that they have students from all 50 states, right? So like, you may get rejected because you're not from Vermont. And they had 3 other kids from Vermont, but Vermont was the last state they needed. So they took the Vermont kid and they didn't take so, whether you can do the work and admissions, all of that has so many other things going on beside your academic profile that it's almost impossible to narrow it down and say that this is why I got in or not. So I think that you can't invest too much in saying, that I got in, it means this. I didn't get in, it means that. Right. I mean, I think that. So one, that hyperfocus is problematic. 2, thinking that admissions is all the highly rejected schools, right? There's 2,300 colleges in the United States that give 4-year degrees. There's about 60 of them that have less than a 25% admissions rate. The overall admissions rate in the country is about, I think it's like 58%, something like that. So most kids will get into a college, right? I think the real questions are, which colleges are you going to get into, and will they offer you enough money to make it affordable?
Somebody listening was just like, did he just say highly rejective?
Yes, I did. I mean, that's what they are, right? Like, if you admit 12% of your applicants, you're not selective, you're rejective. Like, you have an office that spends all its time choosing who to say no to.
I'm so glad you said it on this recording. I know that's a term that Akil coined, I don't know, last year at some point, and it took off like wildfire in the college admissions world, and people were like, yes, this. You got a lot of like this emojis on social media. The whole theme of this series is ease, purpose, and joy. How do parents help? And you can pick one of these if you like. How can parents help bring more ease, purpose, or joy into their students' process?
I think the role of parents is to help students make smart decisions, help students find what matters. I think that far too many people focus on, am I going to get in, as opposed to, is that somewhere I want to go? Right. So I think that what parents should be doing is helping students answer the question of, is that somewhere you want to live for 4 years? Right. I think that's a huge question. Is that somewhere you want to live for 4 years? Is that somewhere that you want to learn for 4 years? Right. So is the social experience appropriate? Is the academic experience appropriate? Is the environment appropriate is the resources and the opportunities that it'll help you create the ones you want, right? There are some places that have great relationship with tech companies. And if you want to get into tech, that sounds great. But what if you don't know what you want to do? Then maybe you want a bigger school, not a smaller one, so you have more options, right? And I think that all of those things are primary in deciding where to go. And parents should be focusing on, parents should be helping students craft a list that's focusing on, do you want to go there? There should be no school on your list that you don't want to attend. I have a 10th grade son, and he just told me he doesn't want to be at a college with 2 skyscrapers in the city. That was perfect for me. Right? Like, I don't know why that became his, but that's literally what he said, 2 skyscrapers in a city. Right? It's like, cool, not NYU. Right? It's like, great. It's like, not NYU, not Hunter. I can knock those off the list. We don't even have to think about them. So he was essentially getting to, he wants a real campus. He doesn't care whether it's urban or rural or whatever. He just wants a real campus.
Yeah.
It's like, cool. That helps narrow down the process. We've cut out a whole bunch of schools from the list just because he made that comment. Right? It's like, great. That is going to be my role to say, okay, we won't even look at NYU, right? Because it's 3 buildings in a city.
Is there anything that you vowed not to do with your kid because you've seen other people go wrong? Like, what's the promise you've made to yourself that you're like, I will not be X kind of parent?
He can't go to Duke. Okay, no. I keep saying that to him because I like the Fab Five and they beat the Fab Five in the 90s. So entirely based on my sports preferences. What will I not do? I won't let him apply to school just because he's heard of it and just because his friends are there, just because his friends have heard of it. Right. So I'm going to challenge him at every turn to tell me why that school's on the list. What do you know about that place? That's going to really be my question. What do you know about the place? What opportunities are there? What's interesting there? Why is that school on the list?
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to flash up. We have a resource that we have a few resources that I'm going to share. One on, if you're interested in like learning more about how to develop a college list, we put together a resource, and there's another whole separate, like a podcast that we did related to that. And this is our college application hub where you can find resources on things like, here's the timeline on when to be thinking about what, how to research schools, how do you decide whether to apply early action or early decision. There's a bunch of brainstorming exercises here. Stuff on how do you write about coronavirus. We didn't really talk about it at all in terms of the application because we were focused on testing today, but how do you talk about COVID-19 in your college essay and application? And then you'll see things in here like different parts of the application, like the activities list and how do you get a rate recommendation letter. And then, as I mentioned, we've got, resources on, paying for college. So I'm not going to go through all these right now, but I'll definitely share a link to that in the chat so that y'all can get those resources. We're almost out of time, Nikhil, but I'd love to just know, and this is sort of like a wrap question, but like, what do you want students to know? If there was something that was like, sort of like, oh yeah, Akil said this, I remember this. If you could like install a little Akil on the students' shoulders as they're going through this process, what would that Akil be saying to them? What would that avatar say to them?
That's an interesting question. Go in terms of college admissions, like don't let brand drive your decision, right? I think that that's really important, not to let brand drive your decision and not to be afraid of a no. I live in New York City. I walk into the bodega every day and the guy tells me no far ruder than a college ever will. I can survive a polite no from a college that feels like a warm hug. Dear Akil, we think you're a great student for another school. It's like that's cool. That's so much better than F no, we don't have that you get at the bodega. It's like, you'll get a no. You'll get several no's. Life moves on. It's okay, right? It's less bad than the no you got when you were rejected from the varsity basketball team. Right? So if you go into this with a sense of calm, recognition that you'll get told no at some places and yes at others, and you want to make sure that everything on the list you apply to is somewhere you'll happily go, then I think it'll work out just fine. Because unless you apply to a super narrow set of schools, you'll get in somewhere. And what you do after college is far more important than what you do in college. I have a bachelor's of architecture and I'm doing test prep. Right? It's like, so your degree may have nothing to do with what you do, but it might.
Yeah, I majored in performance studies and then I went to grad school for acting, and here I am. So awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate this conversation. And I love talking to you and I love hearing when you share wisdom. We're going to link to all the things, including Akhil's blog. Akhil's been on a bunch of podcasts. Thanks again. Thanks for being here and thanks for your work.
Oh, my pleasure. I'll also promo one thing. If you
please do it. Anything you got going on? Yeah, go.
Yeah, I'm actually starting a web series of my own where I'm going to just be talking. I'm going to do a lot of the same stuff, talking to folks about admissions. On March 3rd, there's a session with Jenny from the Common App, a college counselor and a student, and we're going to talk about admissions and things folks want to think about. So if you go to akhilandfriends.org, you can find out more information. And good luck. Find me on Twitter, or mostly Twitter, but I'm also on the other socials at Akhil Bello. If you have questions, feel free to send them my way.
Awesome. Akhil, thank you again for your time. I appreciate you.
My pleasure. Take it easy.
Bye, friends.